Hello! As I said, I'll be spamming from the last vid. Check it out. It helps a lot in understanding this video. Also, this one is a bit more speculative than the last one, so don't take it too much to heart. Now, in the previous video, I theorized that Macaque could not be a hair clone, but perhaps a different type of clone entirely, one made to get rid of some of Sun Wukong's powers. This is because Macaque is very different from other clones. To be in point, clones are usually characterized via command, yet Macaque doesn't seem to be characterized to any certain command. It's also worth noting that MK's clones are also extensions of his personality, that being his people-pleaser side. Party clone is the result if his people-pleasing side actually goes to what people tell him, and if said otherwise, then they're a hypocrite. Artist clone is the side that wants to impress until they're perfected, satisfied with the result that they don't have to ask anymore. And delivery clone is the one who gives up pleasing others. Macaque has none of those traits. Case in point, from the beginning he's just his polar opposite, even with their roles. While Wukong plays a king, Macaque plays a servant or soldier serving them. And Macaque is usually shown to be the voice of reason in the Brotherhood. Again, Macaque plays multiple roles: friend, warrior, servant, and advisor. None of those advocate to Sun Wukong. Sure, Wukong can play the warrior and friend, but most of the time, when playing the friend role, it immediately turns into best friend or big brother, and warrior in the context of Macaque is different. From hero, it's someone who fights for someone above them, like Azure. In short, Wukong always plays an authoritative role while Macaque plays a servitude role, pre-journey era. Which is weird, since if he were a hair clone, he'd also be a little similar to Wukong. Yet again, he plays an opposing role to Wukong. Even his position and where he sits, a usual place where royalty would place their servant's most trusted servant. In the future, however, the roles seem to slightly reverse, Macaque gaining a want of control and dominance, while Wukong seems to easily submit and be of service to people. The act of submission for Wukong is subtle, but for Macaque it's very, very noticeable. But what would Macaque be a clone of? Answer: Wukong's shadow. Macaque's shadow powers have a similar color palette to his powers. Though some may argue that the sets show Macaque having red powers, this could be a scrapped concept like with Spindrax. And we already determined that this is an ability MK has, that Wukong originally had. Why would Wukong's original powers suddenly shift colors if this was already what it looked like? So the only solution is Macaque was created by Wukong's shadow. He did allude to this once.
Are you ever going to get sick of living in my shadow? It's time to give back what you stole.
So this could be figure of speech. There was no indication that Macaque was jealous, nor did he fear of succumbing into Wukong's legacy. The definition of living under one's shadow is to be always perceived as less than someone else, or at the very least less important than someone else. But again, Macaque has always played the servant role, and not once did he actually mind even calling them the sun and moon in modern day. So Wukong should be mentioning him being jealous of his master, not him. After all, the one he wants attention from is Sun Wukong, as he felt abandoned by him. It makes no sense for him to be living under his shadow if Wukong never once made him feel inferior. Again, he did not mind. He used to dictate his choices around Sun Wukong, his very identity around Sun Wukong. He should feel inferior to Tripitaka Sanzang, since Sanzang felt more important to Wukong than him. And Macaque allowed even the Brotherhood to walk all over him with insults because he shows that he literally does not care. It was Wukong he needed a push from. He didn't care what the Brotherhood thought, he cared what Wukong did. It is clear that not only was the voice of reason, but actually cautious when it came to these things. T was Wukong who would drag him into mischief, and judging from his perspective and flashbacks, he usually did join in on the fun with Wukong, so I highly doubt he felt inferior if he agreed. It's also worth noting that unlike Wukong, Macaque doesn't care of the opinion of others. In fact, it's heavily implied that the Brotherhood don't actually know what happened to Macaque, and that he wasn't there when the Brotherhood was sealed. It's also heavily implied that Macaque's memories might have been altered by LBD, considering the flashback was too inaccurate. The fact that it's even implied that Macaque's memories were altered suggests that there was a problem with Macaque that caused LBD to even alter such memories. Which means that Macaque thought Wukong was more important to him, that living under his shadow isn't meant from a metaphorical sense, rather in a literal sense. It is also worth noting that in the Samadhi fire, Wukong knew where Macaque's throat would be, and how long it would actually take him to teleport via shadow. That raises a question: how would Wukong bring his shadow to life? Simple, he used to have shadow-like powers. One question that RV Sketch was stuck on was, where did Macaque's shadow powers come from? As in Journey to the West and in any form of media, Macaque doesn't have such powers. It led them to the conclusion that Macaque made a deal with the Python demon, but I believe in another possibility. Wukong once had shadow powers, since Wukong can get powers whenever he wants and if he feels confident he can. It's not outside the realm of possibility. He used to have shadow powers. Again, we're determining that this used to be a power that Wukong could wield. Of course, there's some doubt he could use shadow powers, but Wukong was also a theatrical guy before the journey and before getting stage fright. So just imagine being Wukong. You decide to do a shadow play for the monkeys. He wants to make it lifelike, since Wukong likes to go all out in the past, and he practices all he can. Eventually, with a little bit of confidence and belief, the shadow comes to life. Considering how Macaque used his shadow powers, sure, he had the help of a lantern in shadow play, but he can also use the shadow to turn into MK, and the lantern also had shadow powers. We never actually considered that the lantern was probably his. And considering how good he is in shadow play, as he can make puppets and can act well, it is clear that the main purpose of the shadow powers was a form of entertainment. Something Wukong was very open about. Thought it was more comedic. He also said it in a very dramatic way, compared to Macaque, who only laughed in silently, unlike the rest of the Brotherhood. As for how Macaque would gain a physical form, every time we see a shadow clone, they seem to be emerging from the shadows. This one in particular is emerging from the huge form. Since we're establishing that Wukong used to have shadow powers, there's no reason for him to not have the same abilities as Macaque. So Macaque having a physical form is him being a shadow clone instead of a hair clone. Looking at the shadow clones in their color palette, though the water is in the way, their palette is colorless, or just the same color as the shadows, unlike Wukong's clones that are perfect replicas. There's also a thing that Macaque's clones are a little bit more dramatic than Wukong and MK's clones. Wukong and MK's clones all pose in the same way as the situation at hand, though the expressions aren't the same. Their one purpose is thus having the same stance. Macaque's clones are more exaggerated. They don't focus on the task at hand in regards to their pose, they simply show that they are indeed monkeys with no mind of their own, further showing that shadow clones are more lifelike and more complex than hair clones. If Macaque is more shadow clone, then why is he red then? Simple. It was sorta a mix of Wukong's powers and his. Wukong's powers are shown to be golden, as for Macaque, purple or magenta, magenta and yellow can make red. And I said, since Macaque's purpose was to get rid of some of Wukong's powers, this form could be a power that Wukong chose to give up. This power could have been gold for all we know. Another proof is something that Wukong said.
So, you got Bone Demon powers now, huh? Well, it is on brand for you to have a worse version of everyone else's powers.
Why would Wukong say he has a worst version of everyone else's powers if he was a hair clone? They have the exact same powers, unless he's a shadow clone, a darker version of Wukong's powers. And by that quote, I think it's safe for me to go into a more speculative discussion of Macaque's purpose. After he says that he has the worst version of everyone else's powers after Najah scolds him, he remarks he does. Macaque doesn't try to deny it. The fact that Wukong even emphasizes this shows that Macaque is meant to have a darker version of Wukong's powers. And if this theory is true, that Macaque was created for the purpose of Wukong getting rid of some of his powers, then Wukong considers that the worst version of his own powers. And if you notice something of the shadow clones, though they have a mind of their own, they also are mindless husks made to act like monkeys. As I said, the shadow monkeys seem more lifelike and unfocused in their common goal. Their pose is more chaotic than Wukong and MK's. In fact, their command seems to only entitle be monkey, or they're simply mindless husks without a personality. And Macaque is Wukong's opposite, from the clothes to the personality, and even to the colors. There's also a possibility that Wukong was somewhat of a perfectionist, or a people pleaser in the past. If this theory is true, then Macaque had to have been created before the journey. He also has shadow powers here. And did you notice that not once has Macaque used the bigger form in any flashback? Macaque favors using this form more than anything else. Even Wukong is unbothered that he can even do this. If Macaque likes using this form, and it's literally his best power yet, he should be using it during the battle with the Jade Emperor. He's shown to have complete control over this form, and though it affects the surroundings, Macaque can control it enough so he doesn't exert that much strength. There's a possibility that in this flashback, Macaque doesn't have this form yet, and if we're going with Wukong created him to get rid of his powers, then there's a possibility that Macaque's true purpose is for Wukong to get rid of things he didn't like about himself, which could be the reason of their fallout. So this memory might be altered, as heavily implied. From the art style to the mannerisms, a fallout did happen between Macaque and Wukong. If Macaque doesn't have his huge form, and he's not even using it on Wukong here, then what if the big form he has is something he recently gained from Wukong? If this is how it worked, then Wukong and Macaque's fallout was more than because Wukong broke a promise. He only came back just to leave again. Adding insult to injury, Wukong gives Macaque his gigantic form or something else I don't know just to leave again. Since I think Macaque was aware of his purpose, I think it very likely that this is when he lashed out. And that's what caused the fallout. That's all. Take care.